Imagine sitting at a fancy restaurant with your own family. You've dressed your best. You're sitting at the table, and for just a moment, you think maybe this time will be different. Maybe tonight they'll treat you with respect. But instead, the sound you hear isn't conversation or warmth. It's laughter. And not the kind of laughter that makes you feel included. No, it's the kind that cuts. The kind that tells you exactly where you stand in their eyes. That night, I sat at the table with my parents, my brother, and my sister. The chandeliers above glistened, the silverware sparkled, and the menu prices were the kind most people would only order from once in a lifetime. I could feel every pair of eyes on me as they joked, as they whispered just loud enough for me to hear. My own family, my own flesh and blood, looked across the table and said things like, "She probably shouldn't even be here. Can she even afford water at this place?" They laughed as if my presence at the table was the biggest joke of the evening. Now, I'd grown up with this kind of treatment. My siblings had always been the golden children, the ones who could do no wrong, while I was the one they labeled the disappointment, the one they never believed in. No matter what I achieved, it was never good enough. And at that table, surrounded by their smirks and their cruel words, I realized they hadn't changed at all. In fact, they had only grown bolder with time. I tried to hold my head high, tried not to let the sting show on my face. But inside I was boiling. And then it happened. The moment that none of them could have predicted. The waiter approached the table, holding the leather-bound folder with the bill. My siblings leaned back in their seats, smirking, nudging one another, whispering that the bill was going to shock me, that I was about to embarrass myself in front of everyone. My parents even chuckled as if they were already savoring my humiliation. But instead of placing the bill in front of them, the waiter turned and set it down gently in front of me. My brother's smile faltered. My sister blinked, confused. My parents exchanged glances, and as I opened that folder, the silence at the table was deafening. They didn't understand. They didn't know why the waiter had handed me the bill, and they certainly didn't know what was coming next. Because what they saw as my downfall, I saw as my moment. They thought they were about to watch me break. They thought they were about to watch me sink into embarrassment and defeat. But instead, I reached for the pen, signed the paper without hesitation, and looked up at them with the faintest smile. They thought they were humiliating me. Instead, they set the stage for my revenge. I wasn't born into wealth. Far from it. I grew up in a modest household where every dollar mattered, every choice counted, and where being careful was the rule of survival. My parents worked hard, but it always felt like there wasn't quite enough to go around. And in that house, I was never the one anyone expected to shine. My siblings, well, they were the stars. My brother was the golden boy, always praised for his charm and easy wins. My sister was the clever one, the achiever, the one who made everything look effortless. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who dreamed more than I spoke, the one who always seemed to fall short of their expectations. At least, that's what they liked to believe. Growing up, I learned quickly that I couldn't count on being anyone's favorite. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, my parents always seemed to favor my brother and sister. When they brought home good grades, it was celebrated with smiles and pride. When I did the same, it was met with silence, or worse, a shrug, as if it barely mattered. I was the background character in my own family's story, the one they never took seriously. But here's the thing. Being underestimated can be a gift. It plants something inside you, something that burns and grows quietly. For me, that fire was the determination to prove that I didn't need shortcuts. I didn't need anyone to hand me anything, and I didn't need to be the golden child to make something of myself. If anything, being overlooked only fueled me more. While my siblings chased quick wins and easy paths, I was building something different. I focused on working hard, learning skills, and making choices that weren't flashy but solid. I didn't talk about it much. In fact, I kept most of my achievements to myself. It was easier that way. I didn't need their opinions or their approval to validate my progress. Step by step, I built a career in a field most people wouldn't even understand if I tried to explain it to them. I started small, working long hours in a tech startup where most people would have quit from exhaustion. But I didn't quit. I pushed through, and eventually I carved out my own space in that world. Over time, I grew into real estate investments and smart financial moves, each decision stacking on top of the last. It wasn't glamorous, not at first, but it was steady, it was real, and it was mine. I created a life that gave me independence and freedom, the kind of life my family never imagined I could have. To them, I was still the underdog, the one struggling to keep up. They never asked about my work, never cared about my progress, and that suited me just fine. Because while they were busy underestimating me, I was quietly building a reality they could only dream of. And yet, I kept it hidden. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was patient. I wanted the moment to be right. I wanted them to see it, to feel it, and to know exactly how wrong they had been. What they didn't know was that I had built a life they could only dream of, but I kept it hidden for one reason: revenge. For a long time, I thought I had found peace in the life I built for myself. It wasn't flashy or loud, but it was mine, and it gave me a kind of freedom I had never felt growing up. I lived in a home that I chose, a place that felt warm and safe. It wasn't a mansion, but it was beautiful, modern, elegant, filled with little details that reminded me of how far I'd come. Every corner carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing I earned it all myself. I could wake up without worrying about bills piling up on the table. I could plan trips, buy the things I wanted, and enjoy the small luxuries of life without guilt. I didn't need to think twice before treating myself. After years of being told I'd never amount to much, I had built stability, and with it came peace. And yet, I kept it all under wraps. No boasting, no flaunting, no need to rub it in anyone's face. It wasn't about proving anything. At least, that's what I told myself. But I wasn't alone in this journey. I had someone who believed in me even when I struggled to believe in myself. A partner, or you could say the one true friend, who saw through all the masks I wore. They knew how much the scars from my family's words had shaped me. They saw the hesitation whenever my phone lit up with a message from my parents or siblings. They listened to the bitterness I tried to bury every time I recalled another moment of being dismissed, overlooked, or mocked. This person always told me the same thing: that I didn't need to let my family's opinion define me, that I didn't need to keep shrinking myself just to avoid their judgment. They'd say, "Why hide your success? Why let them keep believing their version of you when the truth is so different?" But I never listened. I thought keeping everything private was the safer choice. To me, it felt like protecting myself, shielding my happiness from their negativity. I didn't want them to twist it, belittle it, or use it as another excuse to bring me down. So I stayed quiet. I let them keep their illusions. And in my day-to-day life, I was content. I had routines I enjoyed, hobbies that filled me with joy, evenings spent laughing with the one person who truly cared about me. I had financial freedom, something my younger self could only have dreamed of. I could buy the dress I loved without hesitation, invest in a new project without fear, and know that I had built a safety net strong enough to carry me anywhere I wanted to go. It was the life I had always promised myself I would create. But even in the middle of all that comfort, there was always a shadow. Every time I sat across from my family at gatherings, every time I heard another sly comment about how I was still struggling or still the unlucky one, it reminded me that my silence wasn't protecting me. It was enabling them. My refusal to show them the truth didn't soften their cruelty. It only fed it. I thought keeping my success private would protect me, but I was wrong. It only made them crueler. It all started with a phone call from my mother. She told me they were planning a big dinner for my parents' wedding anniversary. A fancy restaurant. One of those places that people save up for just to celebrate once in their lives. The kind of place where the menu doesn't even bother to list the prices. Because if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. On the surface, it sounded like a nice idea. A family celebration, a chance to sit down together. But I should have known better. From the moment the dinner was mentioned, the comments started. My sister laughed over the phone, saying, "Well, I hope you can afford to join us." My brother chimed in, "Don't worry, maybe they'll let you just sit at the table for free if you promise not to eat anything." Even my parents, instead of defending me, chuckled along as if it were the funniest joke in the world. I bit my tongue. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction, but inside, it stung. Not because I couldn't afford it. I could, more than they realized. But because after all this time, after everything I built, they still saw me as the one who didn't belong, the one who would never measure up. When the night of the dinner came, I arrived at the restaurant early. I had made the reservation myself, quietly arranging everything. To them, it probably seemed strange that I was the first one there, but they didn't question it. They never did. They just assumed I was eager to tag along, desperate to be included. When the rest of my family arrived, the comments started again almost immediately. My brother glanced at the menu and said loudly, "I don't think she'll be ordering anything. Maybe just a glass of water for her." My sister laughed, adding, "She might need to wash dishes in the back just to pay for that." My parents smiled uncomfortably, but I noticed they didn't stop them. I kept my composure. I let them order whatever they wanted. Appetizers, drinks, main courses that could have paid for someone's rent. Desserts so overpriced it was almost laughable. They laughed and bragged about the food, savoring every bite as if their mockery tasted even sweeter with every sip of wine. And then, finally, the moment arrived. The waiter approached the table with the bill. I saw my brother nudge my sister, whispering something, and both of them started laughing quietly. My father leaned back in his chair and said, "Better not pass it to her. She can't even cover her share." And their laughter filled the air. It was the same sound I'd grown up hearing, the sound of being dismissed, mocked, belittled. But this time, something different happened. Because instead of handing the bill to my father or sliding it toward my brother, the waiter stopped right in front of me. He placed the bill gently on the table in front of me, as if there was never any question about who it belonged to. The smiles froze on their faces. My brother stopped mid-laugh. My sister's glass hovered in the air, halfway to her lips. My parents looked at each other in confusion. None of them understood. None of them could comprehend why the waiter had brought the bill to me. I opened the folder, scanned it without flinching, and reached for the pen. The table was silent now, the air heavy with disbelief. And as I signed my name across the slip of paper, I looked up and caught each of their faces in turn. Shock, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of fear. And that's when I saw it, the look on their faces. Shock, confusion, maybe even fear. They had no idea what was coming next. The silence at that table didn't last long. At first, They were stunned, caught off guard that I had signed the bill without hesitation. But my family was never the type to sit quietly in shock. They needed to twist the moment, to claw back control. And they did it the way they always had, by turning it against me. My sister was the first to break the silence. She leaned across the table, her voice dripping with disdain, and said, "Well, someone's showing off tonight." My brother chuckled in agreement, adding, "Yeah, right. You expect us to believe you can actually afford that? Please, you probably borrowed money just to pull this little stunt." I didn't answer. I just sat there, calm on the outside, though inside I could feel the heat of their words, the sting of every accusation. It wasn't enough for them to be proven wrong. No. They had to create a new narrative, one where I was still the weak one, the desperate one. My parents didn't defend me. In fact, they joined in. My father shook his head and muttered, "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're desperate for attention. That's all this is." My mother sighed, saying, "You didn't need to embarrass yourself like this, pretending to be something you're not." Pretending. That was the word that cut deepest. Because I wasn't pretending. I wasn't borrowing money. I wasn't showing off. I had worked for everything, every cent, every opportunity. And yet, in their eyes, I was still the failure, still the one who had to fake her way through life just to keep up with the rest of them. The laughter started again, quieter this time, but sharper. My siblings leaned in close to each other, whispering and smirking, as if they were sharing the punchline to some cruel inside joke. My parents shook their heads in disappointment, their faces filled with the same look I had seen 1,000 times before. That look that said I would never be enough. In that moment, the humiliation hit harder than I expected. I had thought paying the bill would shock them into silence, maybe even earn a shred of respect. But I was wrong. No matter what I did, no matter how high I climbed, they would always drag me back down in their minds. They would always find a way to twist my success into failure, my strength into weakness. Sitting there at that table, surrounded by their sneers and whispers, I felt the weight of every insult I had ever swallowed. Every moment I had let slide, every year of being underestimated. It burned inside me, not like defeat, but like fuel. And that was the moment everything shifted. I realized I couldn't keep trying to prove myself to them. Because they were never going to see me for who I really was. But that didn't mean I was powerless. No. It meant something else entirely. It meant I had nothing left to lose by fighting back. They thought I was weak. But that night, I decided to become someone they couldn't ignore or control ever again. The moment I signed that bill, the table went quiet. For just a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had finally silenced them. But with my family, silence never lasted long. They couldn't accept being wrong. And they certainly couldn't accept that I had done something they never thought possible. My sister was the first to speak. She leaned back in her chair, gave me that look she always did, the one that said she knew better, and said, "Wow, you really went out of your way to put on a show tonight." My brother laughed under his breath and added, "Yeah, she probably had to borrow money from someone just to make it look like she could afford this place. There's no way she paid that bill on her own." The words cut deep. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because they revealed exactly how little they thought of me. No matter what I did, they were determined to twist it into something ugly. To them, I couldn't possibly just be successful. No, it had to be a trick, a performance, a desperate attempt to look better than I really was. And then my parents joined in. My father shook his head slowly and said, "This isn't impressive. It's pathetic. You're just desperate for attention." My mother sighed, almost disappointed, and added, "You didn't have to embarrass yourself like this. If you can't keep up, it's better to just admit it instead of pretending." Pretending. That word echoed in my head. Pretending was what they thought of me, as if everything I had worked for, all the years of long nights, sacrifice, and building something from nothing, was just an illusion. They didn't see my success. They didn't see my independence. All they saw was the failure they had decided I would always be. The whispers started after that. My siblings leaned toward each other, laughing quietly, saying things I couldn't quite catch, but I knew the tone. I had heard it all my life. The sound of people making sure I knew I didn't belong. The smirks on their faces said enough. And sitting there, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. It didn't matter what I achieved. It didn't matter how much I proved myself, how many bills I could pay, how many times I showed them I had outgrown the person they thought I was. In their eyes, I would always be beneath them. They would always find a way to twist the truth into something that made me small again. The humiliation pressed down on me like a weight. For a moment, it felt like I was a child again, sitting in my parents' kitchen, listening to them praise my brother and sister while I was brushed aside. But then, beneath the sting, something else started to grow. Something sharper, stronger. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was fire. And in that fire, I found clarity. I wasn't going to keep shrinking myself to fit their version of me. I wasn't going to keep hiding the life I had built just to avoid their judgment. No. That night, something in me broke free. They thought I was weak. But that night, I decided to become someone they couldn't ignore or control ever again. When I left that restaurant, I didn't say a word to my family. I walked out with my head high, but inside, my chest was burning. The humiliation clung to me like smoke. Every laugh, every whisper, every cruel word they'd thrown at me replayed in my mind. Even after everything I had done, after everything I had achieved, they still refused to see me as anything other than a failure. By the time I got home, the anger had settled into something heavier. I dropped my bag by the door, sat down in silence, and let the memories come flooding back. Not just the dinner, not just the bill, all of it. The years of being brushed aside, the birthdays when my achievements weren't even mentioned while my siblings were celebrated like royalty, the endless comparisons, the way my parents always reminded me I should be more like them, the way my brother and sister used to laugh when I talked about my dreams, as if I was foolish for even daring to want more. It hit me then. This wasn't just about one dinner. This was about a lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. A lifetime of letting their voices drown out my own. And as much as I had told myself that keeping my success private was the smarter choice, I could see now that it had only given them more power. They didn't know the truth, and because of that, they thought their version of me was reality. For years, I thought all I wanted was for them to respect me. But sitting in my apartment that night, I realized respect wasn't enough. They didn't just need to see the truth. They needed to regret every single time they had laughed at me, every single time they had called me weak, every single time they had written me off. I didn't just want to prove them wrong. I wanted to make them feel the weight of their own cruelty. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. The lights glittered against the night, buildings standing tall and unshakable. I thought about everything I had built, everything I had fought for on my own. They had no idea the life I lived. They had no idea about the power I held quietly in my hands. But soon they would. That night, something inside me hardened. The fear of their judgment, the need for their approval. It all fell away. What replaced it was sharper, colder, stronger. I wasn't just their overlooked child anymore. I wasn't the quiet one at the table, waiting for scraps of recognition. I was someone they didn't even know existed, and it was time they found out. That night, staring at the city skyline from my apartment, I made a promise. They were about to learn exactly who they'd been laughing at all these years. I started with a single rule. Everything had to be legal, airtight, and so quietly executed they wouldn't see it coming until the curtain rose. Revenge, I decided, wouldn't be a tantrum or a cruel prank. It would be strategic. It would be irreversible. And it would hit the one place that mattered most to them: their pride. Their livelihoods, the comfortable little worlds they thought were untouchable. My first move was financial. For months, I watched from the sidelines, reading reports, listening to murmurs at industry events, and following leads my work afforded me. I found the family business they bragged about, the one my brother liked to mention at parties, the one everyone assumed would always stay in their control. It was solid, but vulnerable in places they'd never considered. I didn't announce anything. I quietly started acquiring shares through normal market channels, using the brokerage accounts I'd built over the years. No drama, no headlines, just steady purchases until I had a position that mattered. When the market dipped, I increased my stake. When a leadership vacuum opened at the company, I waited, patient as a spider. At the same time, I bought a property that mattered to them. A parcel of land tied to a rental complex my sister bragged about owning. Again, nothing flashy. I used legitimate channels, paid market price, and put the asset under an LLC tied to my investment portfolio. Owning that property was symbolic, but it also gave me leverage. It let me prove I could affect the comfort they'd built their lives around without touching a single family heirloom or saying a word. While the financial groundwork settled into place, I planned the stage for the reveal. I wanted it public enough that it would humiliate their pride, private enough that the details would be mine to control. I decided on a high-profile charity gala, an event tied to causes I actually believed in, so the show wouldn't feel hollow. I booked a venue months in advance, lined up legitimate speakers, and used my network to secure sponsors. I poured resources into a program that would look like an ordinary, respectable launch. Press, guests, a keynote moment. But the keynote would be mine. The social twist was the part that made my plan ruthless and elegant. I crafted invitations that read as if they came from the organizers. Formal, impersonal, and impossible to refuse because the event would be framed as a community-wide celebration. I made sure my family would be on the guest list without ever knowing who the host was. Mutual contacts, politely worded RSVPs, and a few well-placed reminders did the rest. Hay would walk into the room thinking they were just attending another event to be seen at, an opportunity to be noticed. While I waited in plain sight, every detail was designed to create maximum psychological impact. The speech would reveal not just my role in the gala, but also the ownership changes no one expected, the company board composition, the property title transfer, the quiet investments that now put me in a position of authority over things they'd taken for granted. I rehearsed how to say the words in a way that left no doubt and no room for spin. I wanted their faces to change from smugness to disbelief, to watch honor and entitlement crumble publicly. I kept my plans close, telling no one who would gloat or leak. My partner saw only the rear edges of the plot, the late nights and the unusual phone calls, but they trusted me and helped when I needed an extra hand. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled, until it sat complete on my kitchen table. A list of shares, legal documents, guest lists, and a speech that would land like a verdict. Every chess piece was in place. They thought they were in control, but they were already trapped in my game. The night of the gala felt like walking into a mirror I had carefully polished. The ballroom was full, people dressed in their best, servers gliding between tables, the kind of applause that sounded practiced and polite. My family arrived in a cluster, just as I expected. My sister in a dress she'd chosen to be noticed, my brother loud and broad in his laughter, my parents smiling politely as if they belonged at the center of attention. They moved through the room as they always did, scanning for familiar faces, angling for compliments, dropping the same small, proud boasts about their lives. They didn't know why they'd been invited. That was the point. The invitations had been formal and unassuming. They had accepted out of habit because when an event promises visibility, they go. They circulated among the guests, name-dropping the usual things, leaning into conversations to be seen as important. They were exactly as I remembered, certain of their place, convinced that tonight would be another stage for their little victories. I watched them for a long time, drinking in their arrogance like fuel. People clustered around them, laughing at their stories, nodding at their confident claims about family businesses and investments. My sister sipped champagne and preened. My brother recounted a real estate win as if it were a medal, and my parents basked in the attention. The room hummed with the sound of people accepting their narrative. Then the lights dimmed, and the program began. A few speeches, a filmed montage, polite applause. I listened from the side of the room, heart calm, breath even. Everything was unfolding exactly as I'd built it. When the MC introduced the keynote, there was a polite murmur of anticipation and then surprise when my name was announced. Their faces changed when I walked to the stage. Confusion first, disbelief next. My sister's smile faltered. My brother's laugh died midair. My parents looked at each other, searching for a cue they didn't get. I stood at the podium, and for a moment, I simply looked out at them, at their stunned faces, the way their eyes widened, the way a hush passed through their little cluster like a ripple. I began my speech, not with grandiosity, but with a quiet confidence that made people lean in. I spoke about the charity, about the cause the gala supported, about why community mattered. I told the room a few true stories about hard work and the small decisions that matter in the long run. Then, with the room listening, I shifted the focus to the work behind the event, the sponsors, the organizers, the people who'd made it possible. I named names. I explained, simply and plainly, how the evening had come together. And then I said something that felt like the click in a lock. I described my role in the last year, how I'd invested in local businesses, how I'd supported redevelopment projects, how I'd quietly taken on leadership positions where no one expected me. I spoke about partnerships I'd formed and decisions I'd made that directly affected companies and properties people in that room cared about. I didn't shout it. I stated it like a fact. As I revealed the ownership changes and the shifts in leadership, moves that touched the very companies my family bragged about. The murmurs turned into gasps. My sister's face went pale. My brother's jaw tightened. My parents sat rigid, their expressions a mixture of shock and denial. Around the room, people exchanged surprised looks. Guests who had been chatting moments before were now focused, whispering, recalculating. Then I paused and said, without bitterness, but with perfect clarity, that not everything I did was meant to be loud. I mentioned an evening, the kind of family dinner where small cruelties build up over years, and said that sometimes the quietest people had the sharpest edges. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The memory landed like a stone in still water. Applause followed the facts and the charity's cause. Polite at first and then warmer as the audience understood the scope of what had been accomplished. But when I locked eyes with my family across the room, I saw something I'd been chasing for years. The first flicker of shame. The room was already buzzing. My family still frozen in their seats. But I wasn't finished. Everything up until that point had been the prelude. The real symphony was only about to begin. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for the weight of my words to settle. Then I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady, my heart calm. I want to share one final truth tonight, I said. Because this cause, this event, and everything it represents, it isn't just about the community. It's personal, very personal. The room leaned in. Even the servers stopped moving. And across the tables, my family's eyes were locked on me, dread blooming in their expressions. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. I smiled, not cruelly, but with the kind of certainty they had never seen from me before. This gala is not only a celebration of what we can build together, it's also a turning point. Many of you know the family company that's been in this community for decades. For a long time, it's been a symbol of stability, but also of struggle. I paused, watching my brother's face pale. That company, as of last quarter, belongs to me. I now own the controlling shares, and starting next month, I'll be serving as its chair. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps, whispers, the sound of people turning in their seats. My brother's hand clenched into a fist on the table. My parents' mouths opened, but no sound came out. My sister looked like the ground had just given way beneath her. But I wasn't finished. I leaned forward again. And some of you may remember a certain restaurant, the one where I was recently reminded that sometimes even family can be cruel. I let the sentence linger, then smiled. It's funny, really, because as of this year, that restaurant chain is part of my portfolio too. So the next time you eat there, you'll be dining at a table with my name. But most of all, I said, my voice softening, this evening, this entire event is dedicated to the opening of the new charity wing, an initiative I fully funded, and it carries my name, not the name of anyone else, mine. The screen behind me lit up with the unveiling, my name in bold letters, etched into a future they could never erase. I looked across the room at my family. My brother's face had drained of color. My sister sat rigid, lips pressed thin. My parents looked older in that instant, smaller somehow, as though the air had been stolen from their lungs. They didn't laugh, but I barely heard it. My eyes stayed on them, steady and unflinching. And in that moment, they finally understood. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd built their lives on a lie. And I had shattered it. When the applause faded and the lights dimmed, I stepped away from the podium with a strange calm in my chest. Not triumph in the loud, victorious way people imagine. Not gloating or arrogance. Just peace. For the first time in my life, I felt free. My family sat frozen long after the speeches ended, unable to pretend, unable to twist the story into something that made them look better. They had spent years painting me as small, as weak, as the one who would never measure up. But that night, the world saw the truth, and they saw themselves for what they really were. Petty, cruel, and wrong. I didn't need their applause. I didn't even need their acknowledgement. My revenge had never really been about money or power. Those were only tools. What I wanted, what I needed, was to reclaim my dignity, to strip away every insult, every smirk, every dismissive word they'd thrown at me, and replace it with silence they couldn't break. And I got it. For years, I thought if I worked harder, if I proved myself enough, maybe one day they would finally respect me. But standing there, I realized the truth. I didn't need their respect. I didn't need their approval. I never had. All I ever needed was to believe in myself enough to stop caring about theirs. That was the real victory. After the gala ended, I didn't walk over to them. I didn't try to explain myself or offer them comfort. I left them sitting in their stunned silence while I walked out into the night air, my head high, my heart unchained. For the first time, their judgment no longer had power over me. Their voices, the ones that had haunted me since childhood, were gone. Revenge didn't erase the past. It didn't make them better people or change the years of pain they caused me. But it gave me something I had been denied for so long: control. It gave me the strength to finally walk away from their toxic grip and never look back. They could keep their bitterness, their envy, their endless competition. I had built a life far beyond their reach, and nothing they said or did could touch it anymore. The truth is, I never needed them to believe in me. I only needed to believe in myself. And now, they'll never forget the day they tried to humiliate me, because it became the day I won. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret it, if I regret keeping my success hidden all those years just to wait for that one moment. My answer is always the same: no. Because the sweetest part of revenge wasn't the shock on their faces or the whispers in the room that night. It was the knowledge that I will never again sit quietly at a table where I am disrespected. And to this day, whenever I sign a bill at a restaurant, I smile, because I know I've already signed my family's defeat.